Good evening. It is a beautiful winter day here in my city. It's creeping close to sunset. I love recording either close to sunset or early in the morning or on a cloudy day where the light is diffused. It just gives the video a really nice look. Things might come off a little differently today. I'm recording with my laptop for the first time. My cell phone battery was almost dead. So we'll see how this goes, how it turns out. I've done a few tests. It seems to work. So here goes. This week's topic is part 2 in the series, Healing from Religious Trauma. And trust me when I say I've been doing a lot of thinking this past week about what to share today. I think I decided several days ago that this would be my topic for today, but deciding exactly what to share has been really difficult. As many of you who are friends with me on Facebook will know, this past week I came out. It's kind of the last stage of me coming out about my decision to no longer identify as a Christian. I had already, as I've said in previous videos, I had already shared that with my closest friends and family, as well as with some of my coworkers, because I see them every day. Many of them are Christians as well. So I've been talking to people about this for probably, well, honestly, the whole time. Like my best friend and my wife, the two of them have been with me through the whole journey. We've been talking all along the way about this. And slowly I've brought in other family members, my siblings, my father, and just one by one, just other people that I know, that I'm close to. And I knew eventually, if I wanted to kind of get back into the world of social media and start connecting and reconnecting with my friends and family there, if I wanted to get involved at all in meaningful discussion, I would have to share the changes that had happened in my life. So I did that this past week. As many of you know, it's been tough, I'm not going to lie, but it's also been amazing. Honestly, I feel like I have connected on a deeper level with many of these friends than maybe I ever have in some cases, and definitely deeper than I had in years in most cases. It's been so meaningful to me, like how many of my friends have reached out and just talked to me about it, thanked me for my honesty, or just expressed their honest emotions. And even though it's hard hearing some of the painful emotions that have been shared, I still really value what those friends and family have shared with me, and I really want to understand how they're feeling, how they're processing it, how they're thinking, and I want to do the best I can to care for them through all of this. I'll give a really brief update, and I'm going to tell this story in a little more detail in actually what I hope to be my first blog post this week. I'm getting ready to start up a blog that I think will definitely have connections to this video log, this vlog. There'll probably be times, as I've said before, where these videos will be embedded in certain blog posts that are related to each other. But the title of my blog post for this week, I think, is going to be God Met Me in My Honda on Friday. So, as I've been going through this whole process, there have been times where, I'll be honest, I've been very close to becoming an atheist. I think the more I confronted some of the really, at least what for me were the really painful parts of the Bible and of my tradition and of my personal experience with both of those things, as well as just trying to figure out how my relationship with God fit into all of that, one thing I couldn't forget was how real it felt to me to connect with God on a personal level. And the times where I would pray and it seemed like I would receive an answer that was just too specific and too perfectly timed to be mere coincidence. I've studied enough neuroscience and psychology in the last year and a half to know that the human brain does look for patterns. And it can misfire. Like, we can see patterns where they don't exist. Motivated reasoning can lead us to see patterns where we want to see them. So as I've been parsing through all of this and searching through all of this, I've been very aware of that possibility, and I've been very cautious about saying with any kind of certainty that I know that was God working in my life, or God providentially moving circumstances to help me, or God teaching something, or guiding my steps, or giving me wisdom. I've been very cautious about allowing myself to say that in any kind of concrete way. And even now, I can't prove it. Like, I can't prove that empirically any more than I could prove in the past, even as a Christian, that the Bible was the Word of God, that everything it said was true. You know, I can't do, again, this is where epistemological humility comes in. I can't prove that beyond the shadow of all doubt. And honestly, I think the idea of absolute certainty is an illusion. I know that may sound harsh, but I think because of our very human limitations, the limits of our ability to gain knowledge and to understand what's happening to us, what is going on in the world around us, as well as how the universe operates, not to mention, how God operates. I think this idea of absolute certainty, or even of, this is another topic, but moral absolutes, I just don't think it's helpful, because even if we found something that was absolutely certain, or a moral absolute, we have no way of knowing that we found it. So this is where I think humility comes in, and honestly, I think we're a decision to trust, our current level of understanding or perception is. Anyway, so Friday, I'll just share real briefly. Early on in my deconstruction, there was a particular song written by Michael Gungor and his wife Lisa Gungor. And I might be getting the title wrong, but I believe it's He Makes All Things Good. And I remember at a point, particularly low point early on in my deconstruction, I remember listening to that song, and it might have been the first time, I'm not totally sure, but it just brought me so much comfort. Some of the lyrics go that, and I'll provide a link, I think, down below to the song, but it's like, there is no reason to fear. I'm in the hands of the one who is holding the sphere. And that line back then just brought me so much comfort. I was like, I think God is in this, and it's going to be okay. But obviously, as I continued to wrestle, there were days where I'm like, God can't be real. There's so much pain. There's so much suffering. I can't prove it. This atheist that I'm examining his argument, and he's making such a compelling argument. And then there were other days where I'm like, but all these things I've seen have to be real. But then I was trying to look at the view of God that I see in the Bible, and I'm like, I hope God's not like this, because the more I look at this with my eyes open, the more he seems too much like one of us. He seems no better than the humans who wrote this book. And all those things like pulling at me and trying to figure it out. And at the end of the day, and I know this will sound, I know this will be hard to receive for those of you who are still Christians. I'm not saying for all of you. From what I've seen just this past week, many of you who have communicated with me, I think you're mature enough to hear this and just trust that God is working in it. Others, I know it'll bring more fear, and I understand that. I really do, and that's part of what I want to talk about today. I really do understand that. But for me right now, in order to hold on to God, I have had to let go of Christianity. And in particular, I've had to let go of what I will call the fundamentalist approach to the Bible that I was discipled in, that I was trained in, that I was taught. And I hope your mind doesn't go here, but I am not trying to blame my parents or my pastors, because that's the tradition they were also raised in. And I know that in many ways it was a movement that started back in the 1920s in reaction to what was termed by the more conservative elements progressive Christianity. As the discipline of modern science developed, and obviously the theory of Charles Darwin's theory on the origin of species, was like an atom bomb in the scientific field, if you will, and just so many after effects, even now still, some negative, some positive, but it was a game changer for sure. And not to mention the discipline of archaeology as that increased. So you just see through the discipline of science, we're learning more, I think, more accurately, gradually more accurate picture of the way the universe operates. And some of those conclusions, and I don't say conclusions in any absolute sense, but rather just some of the preliminary conclusions or some of the theories that we're developing were in direct conflict with philosophies that were taught in the Christian Bible, as well as, historical claims that it makes. And there was this visceral reaction to that amongst American churches, and I'm only speaking about the movement in America at this point. I'm not familiar with the history outside of our own country, and I'm most familiar with it within the Baptist context that I grew up in. There were some pretty rough fights and debates that went on, and some splits that happened, and it got rough. But the reaction was to hold even more tightly to this, and I'll use a term from my tradition, this literal, grammatical, historical interpretation of the Bible. Now, I'm not going to get into the specifics of that science of interpretation, or hermeneutic as it's called. I want to talk more about the personal side of that and how that relates to my faith journey and how the effect I have seen it have on other people's as well. So I'm going to talk about the way that the Bible was held onto, and the particular perception of the Bible or interpretation of the Bible. At least in my experience, I've seen it held onto so tightly. It's like, we have to be sure about this. This has to be the way it is. And if it's not, then let's just throw the whole thing out. Just that kind of certainty, holding it with closed fists. And I think, honestly, at the end of the day, in many ways, I'm using my old terminology, but the Bible, which we called the Word of God, was, knowingly or not, I don't think anyone was intentionally trying to do this, but in effect, it was exalted to the same position as God. It was equated with God, so that I know, speaking for myself, until very recently, I'm talking the last few months, I have not even known how to relate to God outside of the Bible or Christianity. It was that tightly connected for me. And thinking about what I wanted to share today, I was having a conversation with a friend who had reached out to me in response to me coming out on Facebook this past week. And I'm not going to mention this person's name or any other details of our conversation, but just at one point, this person used the phrase, we can't trust our heart. That may not be verbatim, but basically it's that phrase, we can't trust our heart. So that just got me thinking, and I wanted to read I was trying to read my Kindle. It's not one to work for me, but I may not have time to read the whole thing. I'm trying to keep this to 20 minutes. But it made me think of a verse, and that was quoted frequently in my tradition. And, the verse is, the heart is deceitful, and I'm going to use kind of the New King James translation. The heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Who can know it? I have the ESV here. It quotes it a little differently. It says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? And the context, I just read the chapter before I started this video, and the context there is basically don't trust in man, trust in God, because, man's heart is deceitful. Again, to use the King James language, it's desperately wicked, or here it says deceitful above all things. Who can understand it? Who can know it? I'm not going to get into a precise, interpretation of that passage. I want to talk about how that verse was used in my community and how it affected my psychology and my relationship with God and my relationship with myself and my own body. And as I was thinking about what my friend shared, a question came to my mind, like, what is the heart in that context? What does that mean? Obviously, I'm not a Jew living in, this is in the book of Jeremiah. I want to say that was written somewhere in the 6th century BC. Don't quote me on that, but somewhere around that time. I mean, we're talking like 2,500 years ago. I didn't grow up in that culture. I couldn't come close to fully understanding it. And even if I studied the heck out of every piece of literature I could get my hands on that relate to that ancient culture, I still wouldn't understand it the way Jeremiah did, or whoever wrote that down. Tradition holds that either Jeremiah wrote it down himself, or perhaps Baruch kind of wrote it down like a secretary for him. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole right now, but anyway, I didn't grow up in that culture, so I don't know exactly what Jeremiah would have thought of when he said that. But how I received it, I think in my lived experience, was my emotions are deceitful, my feelings are deceitful and desperately wicked. So don't trust them. Trust the Bible. Trust God. That's, I think, how I usually received that and how I internalized it, whether I could even voice that or not. And I think what that eventually led to for me was a growing disconnect between my, if you will, my mind and my body. Because emotions, there's an emotional center in the brain, but we feel them in other parts of our body as well. Like it can be a very visceral experience, and whether it's anger or sadness or happiness, whatever the emotion might be, like it often affects more than just your mind, if you will, more than just your physical brain. You can feel it in other parts of your body. One emotion, I think, is shame, and like the posture I think of when I think of shame, and shame is something I've wrestled with a lot in my life, a lot. It's been one of the most damaging emotions I have experienced. When I think of shame, I think of like this, just like pulling in on yourself and, kind of just rocking back and forth, and like, or just giving up, just like, and I've learned enough about the body in the last few years, and I've learned about depression, which honestly was a struggle for me from age 15 off and on. Like, it began back when, and many of you know this story, but when my mom had cancer during my high school years. She eventually died when I was 17, right before I went and began my freshman year of college, actually. She died just a month or so before that. But during that period of her illness, like, I remember, I think I was about 15 when I started experiencing depression for the first time. And I don't think it got to the clinical, like what you would call clinical depression, for quite a while. But fast forward to like 2006, 2007, illness hit my family again. Myself, my dad, and my sister contracted a contagious disease. Illness hit our family again, and because we didn't want other people to contract it from us, we started self-isolating. And in many ways that like reawakened the trauma that we were going through, with my mom's illness and my mom's death. And I think for me that ultimately led to severe depression. And honestly, I wasn't willing to admit to myself how bad it got until recently. But yes, that was severe depression for me. Over the last 2 years, I've been getting therapy, and I'm on like some mild medication now as well, and I just feel so much better. It's like a huge weight lifted on my shoulder. I feel so much more alive now than I had for over a decade, honestly. But that depression, as I understand it, is, and don't use this, please, don't use this as a diagnostic tool. I'm not a licensed therapist or a licensed psychiatrist or psychologist. I'm not an expert. I'm just sharing what I know. So please take what I say with a grain of salt, and do your own research and talk to a therapist yourself. I'm just going to share my understanding. Depression is your body's response to overwhelming trauma or emotion. And in order to protect itself, your body, in a sense, shuts down your emotion or suppresses your emotions. And you feel kind of dead inside. You lack motivation. You have trouble getting excited. For me, in some of the darkest days, I could barely get out of bed in the morning. There were periods there where I didn't have a job, and I didn't have to get out of bed in the morning. And often I would escape to fantasy realms, like watching TV all the time, movies, fictional books, what have you. But there began to become this disconnect between my mind and my body, my mind and my emotions, and the depression was part of that. And how my religious beliefs played into that. Like, even though there was this part of me that longed to feel genuine emotion, genuine excitement, like genuine desire, whether that be, hope, whether that be sexual desire, whether that be joy, to feel genuine anger or deep sadness or grief. And it's like I couldn't feel any of those. Like, everything was muted, everything was suppressed. And when I would feel twinges of that, sometimes I would almost feel guilty, because the way I had internalized verses like Jeremiah 17:9 that were quoted frequently, is that I can't trust my feelings. I can't trust my feelings. I can't trust my feelings. I have to trust the Bible. I can't trust my feelings. I have to trust the Bible. I can't trust my feelings. This is the way I internalize that. I can't speak for anyone else. I'm just speaking for myself. And you combine that with, in the tradition I grew up in, like this strong emphasis on servanthood and sacrificing your own desires, submitting them to the desires of Jesus, like sacrificing them for the benefit of others, which I'm not bashing that, like, but this idea of giving up your personal desires, sacrificing personal desires. So in the end, the way I internalized that was, what I want isn't important. It doesn't matter in the big scheme of things. Doesn't mean it doesn't matter at all, and it doesn't mean that I necessarily thought it didn't matter to God. But big scheme of things, in terms of what was of value or what gave meaning to my life or what I should invest my life into, my personal desires were insignificant. And as a consequence, like honestly, up until this past year, I've had such a hard time just simply asking for something I want. It's like, hey, I want to do this. There's like this shame response within me that says, oh. And I don't even have to consciously think that. It's just like, oh, my desire is not important. I need to think about the other person. Or like, I couldn't do something as simple as asking for what I wanted. So like that interplay between, on the one, being told to don't trust your feelings, your desires must be subjugated to the needs of others and to the desires of Jesus. Your emotions and your desires don't matter at the end of the day. And I know no one would have straight up said that to me, and I probably never straight up said that to myself, but I think I actually believed that and then internalized it. So it just led to a very unhealthy relationship with my emotions. And over the past 2 years, what has helped me heal from that and develop a healthier relationship. First thing, I'm putting in a huge plug for cognitive behavioral therapy. You know, some people call it talk therapy, and in many ways it's a simple concept, and yet it's so helpful. It's just you're paying a therapist, one who, you know, hopefully you found one who's very well trained, who's compassionate, which I did, and I'm very grateful for. Obviously, I'm not going to name that person because that's a confidential relationship, but this person helped me tremendously. But a lot of what this person did was just listen empathetically, occasionally ask like thoughtful questions that showed that they were listening to me, and then would ask me about my feelings, would give me space to genuinely express my feelings. You know, I eventually felt comfortable enough, like, to curse in front of this person. Like, there's very few other people that I felt comfortable enough to curse, because I think that was kind of an unspoken rule in the Baptist churches I grew up, that you just don't do that, even though it's not specifically outlined in the Bible. You know, like, I mean, you guys have heard me say "damn" in one of my other videos, but like, I would have felt guilt and shame over just saying the word "shit," and now it's like, it's not that big a deal. Like, it's used for emphasis, you know, or when you stub your toe. I don't think God cares a whole lot about that. Now, if you are cursing a person and directing hatred towards a person, that's something different. But just like you stub your toe, like, shit, I don't think God cares that much about that. And honestly, I did come to that conclusion even back when I was a Christian, but now I'm just so much more comfortable, and I'm not prescribing that. I'm just saying, for me, that's been a healthy change. But just to genuinely express my emotions, and then my therapist would, after I had shared something very emotional, he would stop and ask, okay, how are you feeling about what you just shared? So then I just stop and reflect, and, well, that makes me feel sad, or that makes me feel angry, or that makes me feel nothing sometimes, and that's okay. But through the 2+ years of cognitive behavioral therapy, and also started the practice of mindfulness meditation over the last year and a half, which has helped tremendously. And that's one of the things they help you with, is learning how to just recognize the emotions you're feeling. Just acknowledge, hey, I'm feeling angry right now. I'm feeling frustrated right now. And to just sit with your emotion as if it were another person, and just sit with your emotion and let your emotion be what it is. Recognize it. It also can help you to develop skills in learning how to regulate your emotions. So that's another, and I'll add a third, and Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. Parents out there, many of you have probably heard of this show. It's a continuation of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which is also excellent. I recommend both. But Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, we started watching it with my oldest daughter when she was, I think, maybe 10 months old. We started watching it with her, and have continued watching it. Just listened to one of the album soundtracks. They write songs in there just like Mr. Rogers did. They write songs. And one of the things it does is it teaches kids how to verbalize their emotions and talk about them. So like you'll have a moment where Daniel Tiger, just like you'll have an episode, they're about 10 minutes each, so a good time spent for kids, but like adults too in many cases. But he's feeling, this one's about anger. So, another kid that he's playing with takes his toy away, and he feels angry. He's a tiger, so he goes, grrr. And then, the adult figures in that show will then talk to Daniel and say, hey, let's talk about that. Like, and just teach him to just say, I'm angry right now. I didn't have the freedom to do that. Verses like be angry and do not sin. So it's not that I thought all anger was bad. I didn't. But I think internally, I didn't feel the freedom to just acknowledge when I felt angry. I'm not going to share where I experienced this, but I once did this, what I've come to realize since then is a psychotherapy practice called Psychodrama. And in Psychodrama, you have someone who stands in for another person with whom you are feeling a particular emotion. And so that person stands there, and they just stand there, and then you are allowed to say whatever you want to say to that person. And like, they're not really there, so it's role playing. And one of the emotions I didn't think I had much problem with, this was 7 years ago. Wow, it's been a long time. At that time, one of the emotions I didn't think I had much issue with was anger. But I was slowly becoming aware that I did have some issues with anger, and so they asked us to pick an emotion and a person that we wanted to role play. So I picked anger, and the person I chose was God. So, there was another person standing in front of me, in the role of God, basically, and that person just stood there and received what I said. And I opened up and I just talked as if I would talk to God. And it was such a visceral experience, and it was so freeing in many ways, and it opened up something within me. I didn't know I had more of a problem with anger than I realized. And I expressed some anger over, at the time, that just the issues with illness that were in my family, things that my dad was suffering, things that I was suffering, frustrations I had about my love life, that just different things. I just expressed anger verbally, like to another human who, yes, was standing in a sense for God, but there was a human right in front of me, and I didn't do that. I didn't express anger to other people, almost never. But that was so healing and so freeing just to be able to do that. And that is, I've learned since then that is an actual like psychotherapy practice that helps people heal. So verses like that tell you that your heart is deceitful. And then also, and again, I know there's going to be a wide range of opinions on the fall and on the nature of humanity within my friend group, which has broadened a lot over the last year and a half. But the way I was raised to believe is that I am corrupt at my core. Basically, without Jesus, I'm a hater of God. Like, I'm born a hater of God. I'm born an enemy of God. I just want to sin, and even the good things I do are ultimately worthless because they're corrupted by sin. That's kind of what I was internalized. And then obviously you're taught only Jesus can save you from that. Only He can rescue you from that. So I'm irreparably broken and only Jesus can save me. That is reinforced over and over and over again. And obviously the salvation side of that can often be very comforting and cathartic, and was often for me, and helped me, I think, cope with the way I view it now, the more harmful message of I was or am somehow evil at my core. And if I were left to my own devices, I would just run off and do all kinds of horrible, horrible things. And I'm not going to comment on the metaphysical truth or falsity of that at this point. I'm not going to try to prove or disprove that theologically or empirically. I'm just saying the way I lived with it caused a lot of pain. I just felt so much pain. And I will be honest, coming to a more, for lack of a better term, naturalistic view of my own body and my own emotions, my own desires, my feelings, the way my mind operates, the way my brain operates, coming to see myself more from that perspective has made me feel more alive and more free, and has helped me understand myself better, I feel than I had maybe ever in my life, or at least to come to a deeper understanding of myself. And honestly, and again, I know some people have a hard time receiving this, but I think God is in that. And I think God has used science in my life to help me heal. Which honestly, right now, is why I have more trust, broadly speaking, in modern science and what it has to say than I do in the Bible, given that, as I now view it, and I'm not saying I'm absolutely right. Again, I don't know that it's not even helpful, in my opinion, to speculate about what's absolutely true, because we wouldn't know it if we found it. So all I can share is where I'm at right now, because it's helped me more in my personal life with some of my darkest struggles. I currently have more trust, generally speaking, in science than I do in what men who lived 2,000 to 3,000 years ago wrote. Because I understand that just looking at it from a human perspective, these men they didn't have the benefit of the 2,000 to 3,000 years of knowledge that humans have gained about the universe. To whatever degree you speculate that, God was involved in all of that, and I believe He was, or she, or it, or some pronoun we don't even have words for, because I think God is bigger than all of our conceptions, and all of our sacred writings. God is bigger than that. If He's he or she or it, or I'm just going to say God, if God is so intelligent and so powerful that God created the entire universe, and we're learning more and more about how vast and complex that universe is, this being is that powerful. That just goes so far beyond any of our limited and flawed and beautiful and destructive, and throw so many edges at it. Everything that you see in humanity, I see in the Bible. I see our flaws. I see beautiful ideas. I see harmful ideas, just like I see in other human writings, just like I see in the humans around me, just like I see in myself. And that's okay. I've learned to be okay with that. Still learning, honestly, to be okay with that. And jumping back to Friday, and I'm gonna finish up now because this is getting long. My Friday morning story. So just this past Friday morning. So this song I heard early in my deconstruction. I have Bluetooth in my car. Bluetooth, and my phone, will link up with it. And if I happen to have been playing a song the last time I drove in the car, sometimes when I start the car up, the Bluetooth will reconnect and then pick back up where I left off. To the best of my knowledge, when I went home from work Thursday night, I was not listening to a song. But I could be wrong about that. But as I remember it, I wasn't listening to anything. But Friday morning, when I turned my car on, the Bluetooth linked up and it started playing a song. And no joke. And it was so specific that I could not deny the fact that, and again, I can't say I can prove this empirically. And I don't even want to try at this point. I don't know that matters. But that song, All Things Good, came on the radio, no joke, and I just had to laugh. And I felt this release, and I'm like, I can talk to God again. It's gonna be okay. So my words to my family and my friends, I know what I've shared with you has been so painful for many of you. For others, it hasn't rocked your world because of the confidence you have in God, and I'm really grateful for that. And for those who maybe it has rocked your world a bit, or just made you angry or sad, or any range of emotions, I also don't want to overestimate how important I am to everybody necessarily. Like, it might not have hit you that hard at all, and that's okay too. I'm not the center of the universe. But I just want to say to everybody, and I shared this with my wife and my best friend who had been with me on this whole journey. I shared it with them first. Just what happened that morning. And just the technically 4 words. Grammar Nazi? No. God's got this. And I think, and I could be wrong, but I think God is doing some really cool things in my life and through this whole thing. And I've already seen some really cool, really meaningful and important conversations happen and come out of it. I don't know what that's all going to look like, and I don't need to know. And I trust myself. I'm not taking it for granted that all of you do. And you're free to be wherever you're at in terms of how much you trust me. And I'm okay with that. But I do, and I can say this without feeling arrogant or even guilty about saying it. I feel confident that I'm going to be careful and as loving as I can be in sharing this with you guys. And I'm excited, honestly. I'm excited about where it's going to go and what God's going to do. And it for those who are close to me, it probably sounds really weird hearing me say these things again, because I have barely talked about God in a personal way like that in the past year. And I finally, after that experience Friday and just this whole week and how beautiful and hard and painful and wonderful it's been, I think He's working. And as I said, I think God's got this. Peace to you, my fellow humans. Be healthy and stay thoughtful.